Imagine a world where art wasn't just for, hushed galleries and quiet contemplation. Instead, it was this powerful, really visceral tool for social change, kind of screaming its message from every street corner, demanding your attention.
Yeah.
This wasn't some, distant utopian dream. It was a vibrant reality in a specific time and place where design wasn't merely aesthetic. It was, utterly revolutionary.
And that's precisely the world we're plunging into today, isn't it? It's fascinating.
It really is.
We're taking a deep dive into the fascinating, vibrant, and honestly, surprisingly impactful realm of Soviet film posters.
Right.
And we're doing it specifically through the lens of two kind of unsung pioneers, the Stenberg Brothers.
Unsung is right. I didn't know much about them before digging into this.
Me either, really.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we've pulled from a really rich collection of sources. We've got illuminating excerpts from the definitive MoMA catalog, Stenberg Brothers, Constructing a Revolution in Soviet Design, and also a detailed look into early Soviet cinema culture. So context and specifics.
Good stuff. So our mission today is really to uncover how these two inseparable brothers, Vladimir and George Stenberg, didn't just design posters. They fundamentally transformed graphic design itself.
Yeah, they really did.
They brilliantly melded these cutting-edge artistic movements with the powerful, new, and truly democratic medium of cinema, all while navigating a tumultuous and often dangerous political landscape.
Absolutely. Get ready for some serious aha moments, I think, about how art, politics, and raw power can intertwine in ways you might never have considered.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start with the brothers themselves, their story?
Well, it's striking how deeply their personal story really intertwines with their artistic outlook. I mean, the core of their innovation truly began with this extraordinarily deep, almost symbiotic personal connection.
Symbiotic, wow.
Yeah, Vladimir, born 1899, and Georgy, born 1900, shared what our sources describe as an unusually strong fraternal bond.
Okay.
Vladimir himself, reflecting much later, this was in 1981, recalled that they did everything together from childhood until the end.
Wow.
He even shared this anecdote. Apparently, if one got sick, the other would often follow suit. It just suggests this profound, almost inseparable link, physically and mentally.
That kind of connection is truly remarkable. So this wasn't just a professional partnership like we might think of it today.
No, not at all.
It was almost as if they were a single creative entity.
That's a great way to put it. Our sources reveal that despite Vladimir often being described as maybe the more analytical of the two,
Right.
and Georgy leaning perhaps more towards the purely artistic side, they consistently worked on the same pieces simultaneously.
Simultaneously. How does that even work?
Well, apparently they would even alternate turns in their rush to complete designs, literally passing the work back and forth between them.
Just like handing the brush over?
Sort of, yeah. This level of integrated collaboration where two minds genuinely operate as one, it's just not something you hear about every day in art history.
No, definitely not.
And this profound relationship, it was absolutely foundational to their unique artistic output. It was so integral to their identity, actually, that from 1923, they began signing their work to Stenberg II.
To Stenberg II, that's specific.
It is. And it wasn't just a quirky signature or, a shorthand. It was a deliberate and powerful statement.
Okay.
It explicitly fostered this impression of their creations as the product of a collective, a singular vision, rather than individual talent.
Reflecting the politics of the time.
Exactly. This choice directly reflected the Bolshevik idealism of the new society, where collective endeavor was paramount, right? The individual was often sort of subsumed into the greater whole for the common good. It was a fusion of their personal identity with that political ideology.
When you think about creative partnerships, what makes one truly exceptional? For the Stenbergs, it seems like it was precisely this shared vision and, crucially, this shared interwoven execution that allowed them to transcend conventional art. It wasn't just combining skills, it was thinking and creating as one unit.
Yeah, producing something truly unique that, maybe neither could have achieved alone.
Imagine that kind of seamless dance on a project. Incredible.
And this collective, almost utilitarian spirit, it extended powerfully into their radical beginnings. They shifted dramatically from traditional fine art towards a concept they emphatically called art for use.
Art for use. Okay.
The brothers were still teenagers when the Russian Revolution erupted.
Right. Young guys.
Yeah. And this cataclysmic event, for them, it ignited this sense of extraordinary possibility. This new societal ethos inspired them to experiment freely, embracing a fundamental change in the relationship between what was considered fine art and applied art.
So breaking down those old barriers.
Completely. They firmly believed that for this new society, art had to be integrated into everyday life. It had to serve the needs of the proletariat, and quite pointedly, they rejected representational painting as old-fashioned bourgeois.
Right, that was the enemy almost.
It was seen as a relic of the past, detached from the urgent needs of the present revolutionary moment.
So this wasn't just some casual stylistic shift, was it? This sounds like a deeply ideological decision.
Oh, absolutely. Driven by the revolutionary fervor of the time. Their art was intended to directly align with the state's vision for a new society, to help build it, really.
Brick by artistic brick.
Exactly. And their early education really cemented this practical approach. Our sources tell us they attended the Stroganoff School of Applied Art, known as SV Gomes, from 1917 to 1922.
Okay, SV Gomes.
This institution itself was a crucible for revolutionary art education, emphasizing practical and industrial design skills for the new worker state.
Makes sense.
But what's truly fascinating, and kind of blew my mind, is that they also took classes in military engineering.
Engineering, like bridges and stuff.
Exactly, specializing in bridge and railroad construction. It's hard to imagine two artists also studying bridge construction today.
That's wild. But I guess it fits the constructivist idea.
It profoundly influenced their artistic methodology. It instilled in them this emphasis on construction, functionality, utility, over just pure aestheticism.
You can see the lines, the structure.
You literally can. You can see engineering principles woven into their later designs. And this rejection of traditional fine art, as you noted, wasn't unique to them. It was a hallmark of the broader constructivist movement that they would go on to help define and lead.
Right. Constructivism wasn't just a style. It was a whole philosophy about rebuilding society.
Precisely.
And define it, they did. The Stenbergs quickly became founding members of the Society of Young Artists, or OBYU.
Yeah.
Then, in 1921, they formed the first working group of constructivists within the Institute of Artistic Culture, or INC UK.
INC UK.
These acronyms.
I know, but INC UK was pivotal, right? It sought to unify art and life, pushing for art to serve these utilitarian social functions, and they were alongside big names like Alexei Gan and Alexander Rodchenko. Yeah, the heavy hitters of the movement. They weren't just forming an art club. They were forming a genuine movement with serious aims.
So this group wasn't just about making art for galleries. Their goal was to, what, construct a new world, literally.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the declared goal. This ambitious concept was powerfully articulated in their 1922 manifesto, which had the provocative title, The Constructivists Address the World.
Wow, okay. No small ambition there.
None at all. And the manifesto itself is quite something, truly revolutionary in scope. It boldly proclaimed, constructivism will enable humankind to achieve the maximum level of culture with minimum expensive energy.
Efficiency and progress applied to art. That's intense.
It is. And it didn't pull any punches either. It scorned the aesthetes and artists who, it claimed, destroyed the stern bridges of progress with sugar-sweet opium art and beauty.
Ouch. So beauty was opium.
According to them, yeah. This unwavering belief in art as a practical, impactful force and engine for social change was visibly evident in their early sculptural works.
A KPS thing.
Exactly, the Constructions for Spatial Structures, or KPS. These were avant-garde sculptural pieces made of industrial materials, wood, metal, glass, wire. They vividly demonstrated how they directly applied engineering principles to what was, ostensibly fine art.
You could trace the lines of a bridge in their sculptures, you said.
You really could. And this foundational philosophy of construction and utility, of art serving a practical purpose, it transitions seamlessly into their work for the stage.
Ah, the theater connection.
Yeah. And perhaps most famously and impactfully, it was the bedrock for their groundbreaking designs for the nascent Soviet cinema. The stage became their laboratory for the screen.
Makes sense. So their earliest big achievements outside sculpture were in theatrical design, particularly for the Moscow Chamber Theater.
That's right, founded by the visionary Alexander Tyrov.
And his vision was pretty radical too, wasn't it?
Incredibly progressive for the time. He wanted a kinetic and architectonic theatrical experience, not just illustrative or literary.
Kinetic and architectonic, so moving structures.
Exactly. He didn't want static sets that merely depicted a scene. He wanted dynamic, moving structures that performers could interact with. They would become almost characters themselves.
Wow.
And this vision, as you can imagine, perfectly suited the Stenberg philosophy of art as a functional, dynamic force that dictated movement and audience engagement.
So the sets weren't just backgrounds.
Far from it. They were dynamic, functional structures that actively dictated movement, almost like machines for performance.
Machines for performance, I like that.
In essence, their work in theater served as a direct precursor, setting the stage, you could say.
Pun intended.
Yeah. For their later, even more impactful cinematic work. They were practicing visual storytelling on a grand scale, learning how to control the eye.
And they worked on some major productions. Shaw's St. Joan, O'Neill's The Hairy Ape, Brecht's Three Penny Opera.
Yeah, major stuff. Our sources describe these productions as Broadway extravaganzas, emphasizing dynamic movement over a strict interpretation of the text.
Less about the words, more about the visuals and motion.
Precisely. The sets were often mechanized, using simple geometric forms and bright colors on multi-level stages, forcing actors into specific, visually arresting movements.
And even the costumes were part of this graphic statement.
Totally. Like the ones for a 1925 review called Cucurol. Apparently, characters' names ran boldly along the length of the fabric in large sans-serif Cyrillic letters.
Imagine seeing that. The name is literally part of the costume. Talk about integrated design.
Right. And it's crucial to note that their most significant early achievements were concentrated in theater and film, both inherently narrative forms, unlike static paintings.
Point.
In these mediums, their designs acted as dynamic adjuncts, creating and representing imaginary worlds that could be visually consumed. This experience was invaluable, directly preparing them for the intense visual storytelling demands of the film poster.
Which needed to convey an entire world in just a single glance.
Exactly. A single, powerful glance.
This brings us then to what many consider the golden age of Soviet film posters. So, how did film become this new frontier for art, this state-sanctioned canvas that let the Stenbergs really, explode onto the scene?
Well, in revolutionary Russia, these artist engineers, like the Stenbergs, were naturally drawn to what were considered functional arts, like poster design.
Right, art for use.
Exactly. And this was due to a powerful combination of political ideology and just stark practical concerns. In this new societal framework, art for advertising had actually become a morally superior occupation.
Morally superior, that's a flip.
It was. It wasn't seen as frivolous. It was seen as directly contributing to the new state. And by 1923, when the Stenbergs created their first film poster, The Eyes of Love, film was already recognized as a significant new art form, gaining immense popularity. Then the following year, 1924, private film production was centralized under the government agency Sovkino. And that dramatically increased state support in production, effectively turning cinema into a state-endorsed industry.
Okay, so that state endorsement was a game changer.
Huge.
It transformed cinema and its advertising into this powerful platform for artistic experimentation, now with official backing, which contrasted sharply with the fine arts, right? Which were often viewed with suspicion, maybe suppressed as bourgeois.
Exactly. Alfred H. Barr, Jr., who would soon become the first director of MoMA, he observed this in 1928 while traveling in Russia. He said, "In the Kino at least, the revolution has produced great art even when more or less infected with propaganda."
Interesting observation.
He even wondered why the Soviet state bothered with traditional painters when film was so artistically and politically important. It really was the medium of the moment.
And Vladimir Stenberg himself agreed.
Oh, absolutely. He stated quite explicitly that the poster offered unlimited opportunities in expressing revolutionary ideas and by enormous thematic range. He gave clear preference to cinematic art for its ideological and educational work of the party.
And this view had top-level backing.
From Lenin himself. He famously recognized cinema's immense power as the most important of all the arts for propaganda and mass communication. This wasn't just about selling movie tickets. It was about shaping minds.
It's fascinating. Imagine a medium today that serves both mass entertainment and state messaging. Maybe social media, streaming. How would artists engage with that?
It's a great question. For the Stenbergs, this was clearly a grand opportunity, a vast, dynamic canvas demanding bold, innovative solutions.
And they wasted no time in revolutionizing graphic design with their unique aesthetic, with montage at its core, you said.
Yes, montage. But not just as a film editing technique. For them, it was about creating eye-catching posters, which one might say are designed to shock.
Designed to shock, okay.
As Vladimir Stenberg himself put it in 1928, their aim was to deal with the material in a free manner, disregarding actual proportions, turning figures upside down. In short, we employ everything that can make a busy passerby stop in their tracks.
So grab you by the eyeballs.
Pretty much. This wasn't subtle art for quiet contemplation. This was art as a visual grenade, demanding immediate attention on a busy street.
This bold, almost unapologetic approach was central to their success then, in that very crowded visual landscape.
Absolutely central. Their posters prioritized immediate impact and emotional resonance over literal depiction.
Right, so instead of showing specific scenes...
Exactly. Instead of illustrating narrative moments, their posters aimed to capture the overall mood or atmosphere of a film.
The feeling.
The feeling, precisely. And they worked incredibly fast, often producing a finished design overnight after just one viewing of a movie.
Overnight? Wow.
Yeah. So a Stenberg poster was less a narrative summary and more an allegory composed of small, separate signs, each fragment contributing to an overall feeling or concept.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Take their poster for A Commonplace Story from 1927. It's a melodrama, a tough story about a mother driven to prostitution. The poster uses this strikingly simple yet powerful device. A stark close-up of the woman's terrified face, eyes wide with fear, turned towards these shadowy, indistinct male figures lurking behind her.
Chilling.
It is. It's not a direct scene, but it instantly, viscerally suggests imminent danger and the impossibility of escape. It captures the film's emotional core, the tension, not the plot points. It evokes dread rather than telling the story.
That makes sense. And what about their approach to photo montage? That was clever, right? A kind of subversion.
Totally brilliant, and a bit of a clever workaround given the technical limits of their time. Photo montage, joining different photos together, was a big deal for many avant-garde movements then, especially those into realism or factography.
Right.
But while the Stenbergs definitely used the technique of photo montage in their compositions, the way they arranged elements, they didn't actually use actual photographs in the final posters.
Wait, so they looked like photos but weren't?
Exactly. Their finished images were meticulously rendered drawings after photographs. They simulated the magical realism of photography without being bound by its literalness.
Why? Just technical problems.
Largely, yeah. The printing processes back then were often inadequate for reproducing actual black and white photos in the large sizes needed for posters, especially with the clarity they wanted. But this limitation, ironically, proved incredibly liberating for them. It allowed them to synthesize elements, combine multiple perspectives, exaggerate forms, distort reality in a way pure photography would have made difficult. They could avoid the literalness you see in pure photo montages by contemporaries like El Lissitzky or Rodchenko.
That's a fantastic example of innovation born from constraint, turning a bug into a feature.
Pretty much. And this modification, adding these linear abstract forms, it created a vast array of possibilities for visual impact.
Like in the Pounded Cutlet poster.
Exactly, from 1928. The bold, sharp outlines they used weren't just decorative, they powerfully suggested the force of a blow, literally embodying the film's title.
Wow.
It created this palpable sense of movement and implied the cinematic passage of time within a static image. It wasn't just depiction, it was suggestion, energy, feeling.
Their dynamic abstraction and use of color were also key parts of this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Their emphasis on abstraction came directly from suprematist compositions, think Malevich, Kandinsky.
Pure geometry, basic colors.
Right. And the Stenbergs boldly applied this non-objective art as formal devices to advertise films, which are, by nature, objective narrative things.
That's a cool tension.
It is. As Vladimir Stenberg vividly said, when we made posters for the movies, everything was in motion, because in films, everything moves.
They got the kinetic nature of cinema.
And you see in the posters, figures falling, spiraling.
Definitely. Figures are rarely static. They often seem to fall or spiral through space, caught mid-action. Abstract elements, even the type itself, twist and spin, creating this palpable sense of invisible forces at play, pulling your eye across the poster.
It creates that tension you mentioned. Abstract art for a very concrete purpose, advertising a film. Exactly. It's almost a philosophical statement. And their approach to color was just as revolutionary, since the films were mostly black and white.
Right. No color model to copy.
No existing color model. So they chose colors purely for emotional response, not for realism.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, their body of work, over 300 posters, shows this rare fearlessness in coloration. They often use simultaneous contrast, putting opposing bright colors like vibrant reds, electric blues, fiery oranges, stark greens right next to each other.
To make them vibrate.
Yeah, to cause an optical vibration. It makes the colors almost hum, creating an unsettling or electrifying effect, heightening the surreality of the works.
And faces weren't realistic colors either.
Often not. Faces, often key elements, sometimes in stark close-up, would take on these monstrous tones of green, yellow, or blue. It adds emotional impact, not realism.
Wow.
They also innovated using black ink as a dominant background, creating very dark posters with sharp, luminous contrasts, which ingeniously evoked the experience of watching a film in a dark theater, right?
Pulling you into that world. Clever.
Very clever.
And their typography was also groundbreaking, not just standard text.
Far from it. The typography was almost exclusively blocky, sans serif, and mechanical in appearance, reflecting that constructivist industrial vibe. But while clarity was obviously important for advertising, their use of letter forms was incredibly lively and innovative. Words and sentences became more than just information. They became structural elements within the design itself, actively participating in the visual dynamism.
How so? Like text as shapes.
Exactly. It wasn't just legible text. It was integrated seamlessly into the composition. For instance, in their poster for The Girl with the Hat Box from around 1927, words were ingeniously used to literally stand in for a pool cue.
No way.
Yeah, guiding the viewer's eye like a physical object. In general, from 1927, the name of Buster Keaton, the star, was repeated and arranged to form the elaborate fabric of a suit. Clever visual pun, making the text part of the figure.
That's brilliant.
They even created a sense of depth by gradually reducing type scale, and famously used spiraling or moving type across the poster's width, like in the iconic design for Ziga Vertov's The Man with the Movie Camera from 1929.
Right, the spiraling text.
And they weren't limited to Cyrillic either. They combined Roman letters, like in the poster for Moulin Rouge, showing their global awareness and bold experimentation.
It sounds like their graphic design was really deeply intertwined with the cinematic theories of the time. Eisenstein and Vertov, you mentioned.
Absolutely. Two absolute titans of early Soviet cinema. Their work was redefining film language.
And the Stenbergs' ads show strong ties to their montage theories.
Definitely. Eisenstein, like the Stenbergs, actually trained as an engineer.
Ah, another connection.
Yeah. He believed montage, the collision of images, not just smooth connection, was the structural basis for films, creating new meaning from combining shots. Vertov's Kino eye method involved filming reality, then meticulously manipulating and reassembling frames to create new, often experimental narratives revealing a deeper truth. And the brothers actively translated these complex cinematic theories into static poster form. They imbued them with implied movement and dynamism, a truly remarkable feat for a 2D medium. They were making static images feel like movies.
Can you give an example of that translation, Eisenstein's October?
That's one of the best examples. Their billboard-sized display for October from 1928 features this dizzying kinetic array of images within a single composite frame. Figures tumbling, flags waving, buildings collapsing. It perfectly captures the confrontational, dynamic spirit of Eisenstein's revolutionary film.
Wow. And for Vertov's Man with a Movie Camera?
For that one from 1929, they created a particularly disjunctive image. It features a woman's body represented by a movie camera and tripod, with the lens becoming one of her eyes. It's surreal, unsettling, and just brilliant.
The camera lens as an eye.
Yeah, this powerful substitution of the camera for half of the woman's face profoundly conveyed the film's theme. The camera as an active participant in observing and shaping reality, not just passively recording it. It's a visual metaphor that perfectly captures Vertov's philosophy.
It's amazing.
Their relentless attempt to agitate the static form of the poster by implying motion and progress wasn't just an artistic goal. It was a fitting political and social aim during that period of profound, rapid social change in the Soviet Union. The posters themselves were like miniature revolutions.
All this groundbreaking design didn't happen in a vacuum, though. To really get the Stenbergs' revolution, we need to understand the context, right? The unique, almost paradoxical role of film in early Soviet society.
Absolutely. Film was, maybe surprisingly, a highly democratic medium right from the start, quite different from the traditional arts.
How so?
Well, film was introduced in Russia in the late 19th century, coinciding with massive industrialization and urbanization, drawing huge numbers of people into cities.
Right.
Unlike traditional arts like theater and ballet, which often felt elitist, cinema was broadly accessible to the new worker class. It offered both much-needed diversion from tough lives and crucial access to a culture from which it felt increasingly disenfranchised.
Entertainment for the masses, instantly popular.
Hugely popular. The Lumiere brothers actually showed their cinematograph in Russia way back in 1896. Early films even captured events in the Kremlin, showing its immediate significance.
Wow.
Early entrepreneurs, like Pathé, quickly sent crews to Russia to adapt Russian literature for the screen, showing the immediate commercial potential and enormous public demand. Our sources say this early film culture had a lot in common with the circus, emphasizing popular appeal, spectacle, thrills, drawing huge crowds eager for novelty.
So this rapidly expanding, super popular industry was the perfect canvas for the Stenbergs' work.
An unparalleled opportunity to reach millions. But this popular canvas also presented that complex paradox within Soviet film policy. The constant underlying tension between what people actually wanted to watch and the state's relentless drive for propaganda.
Right, the popularity versus propaganda problem.
Yeah, and movie theaters in Russia varied wildly, didn't they? From uncomfortable, maybe makeshift plebeian halls to grand movie palaces in city centers for the wealthy elite. Stark contrasts with often ill-equipped, even dangerous working-class cinemas. Apparently, the Moscow Duma had to enforce safety measures like brick walls and ventilation.
Basic safety.
Yeah. And film rental, developed around 1907-08, was highly profitable, leading to consolidated ownership and capital that quickly built the domestic film industry. It was a chaotic, booming business.
But the state faced this constant tension, you said, between what the public wanted foreign adventure films.
Overwhelmingly, yeah. Foreign adventure films, light entertainment, and what the state thought they should see, which was ideologically aligned content to educate and inspire revolutionary fervor. Interestingly, World War I, while causing shortages of film stock and equipment, ironically freed the Russian market from cheap foreign competition, mainly French and German films. This actually accelerated the growth of the domestic industry. By 1913, Russia already had 1,450 movie theaters, a massive infrastructure for a new medium.
Wow. And then post-revolution under the NEP, the new economic policies from 1921.
Right. There was a period of relative cultural pluralism. It allowed art to flourish, and even foreign films like influential German expressionist cinema, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, for instance, to be imported quickly, bringing new visual ideas.
So the Soviet government in this environment had three goals for cinema: entertainment, propaganda, and
international prestige, showcasing Soviet achievements to the world.
But these goals often conflicted.
Massively. What's fascinating is that the Bolsheviks, in their fervor, actually overestimated the power of the cinema as a pure propaganda tool. They were largely unwilling to accept that these three goals often clashed.
How did that play out?
Well, despite the late 1920s being hailed as the golden age of Soviet film, with directors like Eisenstein and Vertov making masterpieces.
Right, globally admired.
Hollywood films, westerns, adventure serials utterly dominated the Soviet box office.
Still, even then,
these foreign films were seen as free of any objectionable thematic content by the public, and were just immensely popular. Douglas Fairbanks Sr., films like The Mark of Zorro, Robin Hood, played to full houses. They were seen by many more people than Eisenstein's Battleship Potemkin 1905 at the time of its release.
Zorro beat Potemkin at the box office. That's kind of amazing.
It is. And financially, foreign films were, on average, 10 times as profitable as domestic ones.
10 times? That's a stark contrast for the state. Hollywood's entertainment value just won out.
It did. But Soviet authorities didn't give up. They often controlled content, even changing the intertitles, those text cards of foreign films like D.W. Griffith's Intolerance to stress social content that aligned with their message, kind of subverting the original intent.
Trying to spin it.
Yeah. And for economic reasons, they couldn't always get the newest foreign hits. Chaplin's The Gold Rush apparently never reached Soviet screens. So, in 1924, Sovkino established that state monopoly over film, ramping up domestic production and cutting foreign imports to try and limit audience choices, force them towards approved content.
So this whole complex, contradictory context is crucial for understanding the Stenbergs. They were walking this tightrope.
Absolutely. Creating impactful avant-garde art for a mass medium that was simultaneously a state propaganda tool and a hugely popular commercial entertainment industry competing with Hollywood. Their artistic choices had to navigate this incredibly complex, shifting environment, appealing to the eye, meeting ideological demands, and having mass appeal.
It's a lot to juggle, and their posters reflected this context. They offered an alternative model of constructivism.
That's what our sources suggest. Compared to the more maybe somber geometric austerity of contemporaries like Lissitzky and Rodchenko. While their work was deeply rooted in Soviet art and design philosophy, their greater influence, perhaps surprisingly, wasn't just ideology, it was the raw, kinetic energy of cinema itself.
That's a key distinction, because their posters were drawings after photos, not actual photos.
Right, they lacked that factographic quality of direct photo montage, which is often about literal truth or reality. This meant they were less focused on literal documentary representation and more on capturing emotional impact, feeling, drama, evoking sensations, not illustrating facts.
So while cinema played this essential role in the revolution as propaganda, the Stenbergs' posters were maybe less concerned with creating a strictly new visual vocabulary in the service of an emerging utopian society, compared to other designers.
It seems so. Instead, they stressed the faithful portrayal of the visual substance of film within the context of contemporary art, translating the cinematic experience itself.
Which led to more emphasis on human experience. Fear, pathos, humor, even sexuality.
Exactly. They tapped into universal emotions, making their posters resonate on a much deeper, more relatable human level, beyond just the immediate political context.
And that focus on fundamental human experience is why their work still resonates today.
I think so, yeah. They understood the fundamental, timeless function of a poster, to attract the eye in the briefest of intervals.
That quick glance on the street.
Exactly. Their remarkable innovations, while strikingly beautiful and avant-garde, were clearly means to a desired end, the creation of a visually compelling work that would instantly capture attention. They weren't just artists, they were master communicators, understanding psychology.
Sadly, like many avant-garde movements and artists caught up in totalitarianism, this bright light of the Stenberg Revolution began to fade, didn't it? Tragically.
It did. Part of it might have been their somewhat precarious status as foreigners. They were sons of a Swedish émigré, and sources note they bravely refused naturalized Soviet citizenship during Georgie's lifetime.
Wow, that's bold.
It was. And they weren't party members, even while doing what was essentially propaganda work for the state. This unusual, nonconformist status, however quiet, might have contributed to their eventual decline in favor as things tightened up.
It just shows the precarious position of artists in that kind of state, even if they're useful.
Absolutely. The shifting political winds could turn on anyone.
Oh.
And their inseparable partnership tragically ended on October 15, 1933. Georgie was killed in a motorcycle accident in Moscow.
An accident.
Well, that was the official explanation. But Vladimir, until his own death in 1982, maintained it wasn't an accident. He believed it was a conspiracy involving the Soviet secret police, the KGB.
Chilling. Whether true or not, it shows the atmosphere of fear.
Exactly. And even though Vladimir bravely continued working, getting commissions, he was chief of design for Red Square until 1964, collaborated with his sister Lydia and son Sten. His later graphic works just lack much of the vitality of the earlier collaborations with Georges. They became, well, relatively ordinary, relying heavily on straightforward illustrations of the movie's stars and simple scenes.
A shadow of their former dynamism.
A real shadow. And this artistic decline wasn't just personal, it tragically mirrored a broader, brutal political shift that was about to crush artistic freedom across the Soviet Union.
Which was?
The iron heel of socialist realism. In 1934, Joseph Stalin proclaimed the end of experimental art and anointed socialist realism the new official style.
Anointed, like by decree.
By decree. Socialist realism was all about literal, often idealized representations of communist values, glorifying labor, collective life, the party. Meant to be easily understood by the masses, leaving no room for ambiguity or abstraction.
The opposite of what the Stenbergs were doing.
Completely. This marked the brutal end, not only of the Stenbergs' unique collaboration, but also the careers, and often the lives, of many other avant-garde artists.
Right.
Tatlin, Mayakovsky, Meyerhold, Tyrov himself. Artistic innovation was suddenly deemed dangerous.
And Vladimir Stenberg himself faced repercussions later.
He did. He was actually imprisoned by the Stalinist regime for 18 months of reformation in 1952, only rehabilitated after Stalin's death in 1953. It was a terrifying period where art was completely subjugated to state control.
It's a stark, chilling reminder of how political doctrine can just crush artistic innovation, force incredibly creative people into conventional roles, or worse.
It really is. Thankfully, that 1997 MoMA exhibition, Stenberg Brothers, Constructing Revolution in Soviet Design, marked the first critical survey of their work in the West. It helped reconstruct and bring attention to their largely ignored contributions, a real act of historical reclamation.
So despite the suppression, the tragedy, the shift in politics, their innovations endured.
Absolutely. There are numerous innovations, rethinking poster content, introducing implied movement, the extreme close-up, expressive color, dynamic typography, their unique take on photo montage were undeniably revolutionary with respect to the history of design.
These weren't just fleeting trends. They were fundamental shifts that would influence 20th century graphic design way beyond the Soviet Union.
Definitely. Their ultimate, enduring success lay in that deep, almost intuitive understanding of the poster's simple yet profound challenge to attract the eye in the briefest of intervals.
Back to that quick glance.
Exactly. It's in this deceptively simple ambition that these complex works so excel. They truly represent the best of the spirit of invention that has characterized the 20th century. They turned a fleeting glance into a memorable experience.
Their work really stands as a testament, doesn't it, to how creativity can thrive and leave a lasting mark, even under the most challenging political pressures.
And how understanding human psychology, what catches the eye, what resonates emotionally, can elevate advertising to art, capable of moving masses and shaping culture.
So what does this all mean for us today, when we're just flooded with images constantly? We've seen how the Stenberg brothers, through their incredibly innovative approach to film posters, didn't just advertise movies. They constructed an entirely new visual language,
Yeah, they really did.
melding engineering principles with this bold, almost fearless artistic vision, creating designs that just leapt off the walls. Their work, though suppressed for a time, forever changed graphic design as we know it.
Indeed. When you next glance at a billboard, a movie poster, even a digital ad on your phone, maybe take a second look. Consider how much of what catches your eye today owes a silent, maybe unacknowledged debt to these two brothers.
Brothers who aim to shock and stop a passerby in their tracks.
Exactly. Using art to navigate revolution and reach the masses with an immediacy that still feels fresh almost a century later.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other forgotten artistic movements or overlooked designers might have profoundly shaped the visual world around us? Their innovations so seamlessly integrated that we barely even notice them anymore.
How many hidden revolutions are still waiting to be uncovered in the history of design? That's a great thought to leave things on.